Okay, so imagine that you are running one of the most storied media empires on Earth, and you decide to build a direct-to-consumer digital pipe capable of beaming animated mice, superhero sagas, and space operas directly into 100 million living rooms overnight. You set the introductory price at an eye-watering $6.99 a month, which is roughly the cost of a fancy latte or a quarter bucket of theme park popcorn. To feed this hungry digital beast, you greenlight blockbuster spin-offs with budgets crossing $150 million for a 6-episode season. In less than 3 years, you rack up over 160 million subscribers, comfortably beating your own 5-year projections and sending Wall Street into a brief state of euphoria. The catch: your streaming division is bleeding over $4 billion in cash in a single fiscal year, while the core intellectual property driving the whole enterprise starts suffering from brand dilution so severe that even casual moviegoers begin developing franchise fatigue. Sounds like a business plan only a venture-backed burn-rate addict could love. And for one short, chaotic window in entertainment history, it was the gold standard of corporate strategy. Yet for decades, the House of Mouse ran on a remarkably simple, exceptionally lucrative flywheel that was the envy of global business. You made a movie, you released it exclusively in theaters for 90 days to extract top-dollar ticket revenue. You sold it on physical home video, you licensed it to premium cable, and finally you sold the broadcast rights to television networks around the globe. Every step in this waterfall was a distinct profit center, designed to squeeze maximum capital out of a single piece of intellectual property before recycling it into the next theatrical release. But by the late 2010s, the underlying infrastructure of that golden waterfall was quietly eroding. Cable television was facing a structural cliff as millions of households cut the cord, shrinking the high-margin affiliate fees that had long quietly bankrolled studio overhead. Simultaneously, tech giants with deep balance sheets and zero requirement to make an immediate profit on media were entering the living room, treating video content not as a final product, but as a loss leader to reduce customer churn for hardware, cloud storage, and e-commerce subscriptions. Hollywood found itself staring into an existential vacuum, terrified of becoming mere tenant farmers on platforms owned by Silicon Valley. The strategic pivot, when it came, was swift, aggressive, and fundamentally altered the physics of entertainment economics. Instead of selling its content to the highest bidder, the studio decided to hoard its catalog, forfeit billions in lucrative third-party licensing deals, and build its own walled garden. The mechanics of streaming economics, however, are brutally different from the traditional studio model. In the legacy waterfall, revenues were elastic. If a movie was a runaway cultural phenomenon, box office returns and home video sales scaled infinitely upwards to reward the risk. In subscription video on demand, revenues are inelastic. The user pays their monthly fee whether they watch 10 minutes of content or 10 hours, whether they watch an original masterpiece or 30 episodes of a decade-old sitcom. To justify that recurring fee and prevent subscribers from canceling the moment they finish a show, a metric known as customer churn, the platform must maintain a constant, relentless pipeline of fresh programming. This created a paradoxical incentive loop. Studios had to spend unprecedented sums on high-end production while simultaneously charging a fraction of what that content cost to produce. To understand the sheer mathematical strain of this transition, you have to look at the numbers behind the balance sheet transition. Media analysts like Moffett-Nathanson and Lightshed Partners tracked a period where the studio's direct-to-consumer segment piled up operating losses that crossed $8 billion cumulatively over a 4-year hypergrowth sprint. To put that figure in context, $8 billion is more than the combined nominal box office gross of the entire top 10 highest-grossing films globally in 2023. At its peak loss quarter in late 2022, the streaming unit reported a single quarterly operating loss of nearly $1.5 billion. At the same time, the cost to produce elite-level television was escalating out of control. Show budgets for streaming series pushed past $15 to $20 million per episode, rivaling mid-tier theatrical feature films. When you spend $200 million on an 8-episode series, that project cannot generate a single dollar of direct ticket sales, home video revenues, or international syndication fees. Its entire economic value is tied to 2 metrics: acquiring new subscribers and suppressing churn. But as consumer research firm Antenna repeatedly pointed out in industry reports, as the market reached saturation, the cost of acquiring each incremental subscriber skyrocketed, while average revenue per user in key international markets plunged to under $2 due to low-cost bundled offerings. The system reached its ultimate breaking point when the economic strain began to directly collide with the equity value of the core franchises. For almost a century, the studio's real balance sheet was not built on software or server architecture. It was built on brand equity and cultural scarcity. The theatrical release was not just a distribution method. It was a global marketing event that anointed a project as a Tier 1 cultural artifact. When every movie and television show is dropped onto an app alongside thousands of hours of archival content, that perceived scarcity vanishes. To meet the churn reduction demands of the platform, output was vastly accelerated. Multiple Marvel and Star Wars series were pumped through the pipe annually, spreading talent thin, inflating production budgets, and cluttering consumer mindshare. The results were disastrous for the core brand. Box office tracking for subsequent theatrical releases began to soften as audiences learned a fundamental consumer behavior. Why spend $50 taking a family to the movie theater today, when the exact same title will be available on an app you already pay for in 45 days? The asset that built the company was being systematically used as Kindle to warm up an unprofitable distribution mechanism. In response to the mounting losses and Wall Street's sudden shift from demanding subscriber growth to demanding immediate profitability, the studio was forced into a dramatic strategic pivot. The era of cheap consumer subsidies came to a dead stop, as subscription prices were repeatedly hiked by double-digit percentages. Ad-supported tiers were introduced, and aggressive crackdowns on password sharing were deployed to squeeze more revenue out of the existing user base. Content budgets were ruthlessly trimmed, leading to massive write-downs on unreleased or underperforming titles to clean up the ledger, alongside a return to licensing select legacy library titles back to third-party rivals, effectively rebuilding the traditional economic waterfall they had spent half a decade trying to dismantle. The wild subsidized gold rush of streaming had run its course, proving that while algorithms can distribute content with zero friction, they cannot override the foundational rules of corporate finance, capital efficiency, or consumer fatigue. The streaming pipe proved to be remarkably efficient at moving data, but notoriously terrible at preserving prestige. The grand experiment in direct-to-consumer dominance succeeded in collecting hundreds of millions of credit card numbers, but at the cost of fundamentally altering how audiences value the movies themselves. The credits rolled on the era of cheap streaming. The write-down didn't.